Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, August 22nd, 2019. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news and reading a comment from the Mailbag. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at SlashFilm.com, and I am joined on today's podcast by Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman
Hey, that's me.
and writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey everyone.
All right, guys, so let's jump into the mailbag really quickly. Earlier this week, we talked about the James Bond movie's new title, which is No Time to Die. And we were wondering what Jacob Hall thought about that. He was is a big Bond fan. And we asked people to write in if they knew if that title had been referenced in any of the other Bond movie titles. And we got a response from somebody named Reginald Winchester Beaumont, who writes in, "Attention, good sirs and madam, I will have you know that No Time to Die is not the title of a previous James Bond 007 publication written by either original creator Ian Fleming or one of the several other writers employed by his estate to continue the great English spy's adventures and daring do across various forms of entertainment media. However, you failed to note that this is the fifth James Bond 007 motion picture cinema film to feature the word die in the title. No Time to Die follows in the footsteps of Live and Let Die, Die Another Day, Tomorrow Never Dies, and Diamonds Are Forever." So, person's making a little joke there. All right, back into the letter. Other James Bond 007 motion picture cinema film titles that allude to death include You Only Live Twice, A View to a Kill, License to Kill, and The Deadly Embrace of Death. I don't remember that movie, but I hope you find this educational and that you intend to read this vital correction on your electronic radio program. Sincerely, Reginald Winchester Beaumont. So, thank you for that. I'm pretty sure that was just Jacob Hall writing in with an alias, but
No,
all right.
Reginald Winchester Beaumont is definitely a real person, Ben.
Yeah, he went to high school with my dad.
Oh, good to know. All right, yeah. Maybe they saw The Deadly Embrace of Death together in theaters.
I think they did, actually. It was like a big fraternity night out.
Oh man, I can't wait for somebody to write the fan fiction of that encounter. But in the meantime, let's jump into the news today. And most of this episode, I think, is going to be spent talking about the whole Spider-Man Marvel Sony debacle or scenario or whatever grand term you want to apply to that. So, HT, let's talk about, we did a water cooler episode yesterday. There have been several updates and responses and stuff since we talked about this as it was breaking on Tuesday's episode of Slash Film Daily. So give us how Sony responded to this whole thing.
So following reports that Disney and Sony's Spider-Man deal has collapsed, Sony issued a statement that basically laid blame on Disney. This statement reads as follows. Much of today's news about Spider-Man has mischaracterized recent discussions about Kevin Feige's involvement in the franchise. We are disappointed but respect Disney's decision not to have him continue as a lead producer of our next live-action Spider-Man film. We hope this might change in the future, but understand that the many new responsibilities that Disney has given him, including all their newly added Marvel properties, do not allow time for him to work on the IP they do not own. Kevin is terrific, and we are grateful for his help and guidance and appreciate the path that he has helped us put us on, which we will continue. So this is a statement that they issued to the Hollywood Reporter, and then they would put it on their Twitter account as well. It seems like they are kind of trying to douse the fires that the report has started and maintain any goodwill that Sony will still have. I will say that I didn't really react to this much in the podcast when which the news broke because we were just all so shocked. But I did get the feeling that the reports surfacing, this is all just like my personal opinion, by the way, felt like almost a negotiating tactic from Disney in a way to sway goodwill towards them. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of Sony's response to that. And it's not a great response. It feels very passive aggressive, but I do somewhat feel sympathy for Sony in that they, were approached with a deal that was a little bit ludicrous, 50-50 co-financing deal that would have resulted in a Disney and Sony getting equal amount of the rewards from the films, but it's not a great statement, I would say.
Okay, so I had a question about that, and I wonder if either of you can answer this. I'm not an entertainment lawyer. I don't know the specifics of how all of this stuff works, but I I'm wondering if the 50-50 co-financing option that Disney was seeking here, does that actually mean that they get 50% of the profits on the back end? Have we seen that anywhere? Because I think that's an assumption that a lot of us are making, and I certainly made it. And then I just don't know if that's actually accurate. Do either of you know if that's really how this works?
I'm also not an entertainment lawyer, so I can't completely answer you. But yeah, I did make that assumption because it seemed like the natural sort of progression of logic. But it's possible that the co-financing deal doesn't equate to whatever the gross is that Disney and Sony will pull from that.
Right, and I think, it makes sense. I just didn't know for sure because I haven't seen that language written by anybody with authority, and I just didn't want to incorrectly make that assumption. But I think all of us have made that assumption, and I think, I don't know, maybe if we have any entertainment lawyers who are listening, maybe write in and let us know if that's actually how it works.
I mean, no one has really clarified otherwise. I think that if that weren't the case, someone would have come out by now and pointed their finger and been excuse me.
Yeah.
But it seems like that's probably the case.
To be fair, the reports that we have seen haven't clarified either way because they are all sort of hearsay in general, so we don't really know what the exact terms of the agreement would be.
Yeah, and just to clarify that passive aggressive moment from Sony's response, HT, you were talking about how they said that they don't this doesn't allow Kevin Feige time to work on IP that Disney doesn't own. I think Disney does own Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, that's actually an incorrect statement.
Okay. So they own Marvel, which owns Spider-Man, but Sony is licensing the film rights to Spider-Man. Is that how it all shakes out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's it.
All right. I think we cleared that up. So Brad, I know you wrote about this originally while we were sort of reacting to it in real time on the podcast, but so I want to get your general thoughts on this, and then also maybe right before that, if you could provide us with several of the updates that have happened since this news initially broke.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think this is a travesty. Regardless of whether or not you think Disney deserves more money, this just creates a clusterfuck for the Marvel Cinematic Universe and for the future of Spider-Man. I mean, you don't necessarily need superheroes to cross over into Spider-Man movies to make them successful, but we're talking about Spider-Man movies that would probably have the inability to reference anything or any characters that have happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because he's no longer part of it, and Sony would no longer be working with Marvel. And we're talking about a franchise that has, even when superheroes don't appear in that franchise, Peter Parker specifically mentions them, when he thinks maybe he needs help or something like that. And he specifically mentions Captain Marvel, Doctor Strange, and Thor in Spider-Man Far From Home. And that's just going to be something that doesn't pop into his head anymore. No one's going to think about where are the Avengers when this stuff is going on or anything like that. So I just think it creates a real mess narratively for both Marvel and Sony. But interestingly enough, it seems like these conversations are ongoing. It's that this isn't necessarily a done deal yet where they're just giving up and walking away. It sounds like maybe they're still talking, and Disney might have potentially, wanted to put this information out there and kind of rile up fans so that Sony can see, look, guys, you're going to really fuck this up if you don't want to renegotiate with us. But it seems like one of the interesting things about the future of the Spider-Man franchise is that originally it was said that both Tom Holland and director John Watts were on board for 2 more Spider-Man movies at Sony. But John Watts apparently is not signed for any more Spider-Man sequels. And so if he were to stay involved, he would have to negotiate a new contract. So there's no confirmation or certainty that he would be back for whatever Spider-Man 3 would be, presumably homeless, as I predicted long ago. And
wait, let me stop you really quickly. Do we know if Tom Holland is actually signed? Has anybody confirmed that?
Tom Holland is contracted for 2 more movies, so he no matter what, he would have to be in those 2 movies unless something crazy were to happen, and he would pull out. I would presume have to pay a penalty or something like that. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm not an entertainment lawyer. So yeah, and then last we heard is that apparently the deal, the negotiations when they were breaking down was that Disney wanted a 30% stake, and that's when the negotiations kind of broke down. And now we're where we are now, where we're not sure exactly what's happening, if Sony and Disney/Marvel are gonna work this out, or what's going on. It is very, very frustrating.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that last point was in the original report. It said that Disney wanted a 50-50 co-financing deal with Sony, and then now this update from the Hollywood Reporter is saying that Disney actually was willing to go down to a 30% instead of an equal 50%, and Sony still didn't take that deal. So there's all sorts of, we can argue all day about whose side, what might happen. We weren't in those rooms. We don't know what those negotiations were like. Brad, I think you've laid out the case that a lot of people are feeling, where it's just, they're thinking about the MCU and the impact of that and what that is going to have on the storytelling level.
And also, I feel like we have to consider too, just like, you have to think about Kevin Feige saved Sony's ass when it came to Spider-Man. He made Spider-Man viable for them again. Spider-Man Far From Home is now Sony's highest grossing movie of all time. And Tom Rothman is an idiot. He has consistently and frequently made shitty decisions, especially with regards to blockbusters, and he was very blind when it came to the idea of even having successful comic book movies, and thought that they were a fad to begin with. He doesn't get it. He's a moron. He has no vision whatsoever. So him being one of the people behind this decision just shows you how asinine this whole thing really is.
Yeah, and he ran Fox for a long time and was one of the people who really didn't understand what was going on, even with the early X-Men movies. He like you said, thought this whole thing was a fad and just did not understand the right way to make these films. But HT, I know that you were talking a little bit about in our Slack channel about how you, just like me and everybody else, are upset with what this might do to the creative angle of the MCU. But the idea, I don't know. I'm trying to put words in your mouth and I don't need to. So what are your updated thoughts on this?
Well, from a business standpoint, I guess I would say it just the whole thing just kind of stinks to me because of how powerful Disney has grown and how much of its weight it's really throwing around without really needing to. I mean, I also agree with you on the creative standpoint and the narrative standpoint. I think that Spider-Man has been helped so much by being part of the MCU, and Kevin Feige has brought the Spider-Man franchise back into the light. But with Disney's purchase of 20th Century Fox and it basically dominating the box office right now, the summer box office, the top 5 films are all Disney owned, and I think of the top performing films of all time, is starting to become dangerously Disney dominated. So it's just a matter of I guess the monopoly at stake that Disney is starting to kind of creep into. And again, Brad kind of mentioned this, Disney really need more money. I understand that this contract was starting to it was a deal that was going to end with Spider-Man Far From Home between Disney and Sony, and they were kind of re-upping that deal, and that's where negotiations kind of fell apart, and that Disney would kind of want to have more of a stake in it because they have been so instrumental in bringing it back into public favor. But I do think that it felt very just overly like they were playing hardball in this when they didn't need to.
Yeah, it's tough because if you're the king of the mountain, of course you're going to want to play hardball, and you're in the position to play hardball. And, having garnered so much public support with the good work that Kevin Feige has done building the MCU, they have an army of fans at their back now to that they can point to and say, hey, we have all these supporters. So, basically bullying people into making deals with them. So yeah, it's a tough situation. But apparently Jeremy Renner is the only major actor in the MCU to actually go out on social media and comment on this. I did a huge roundup search yesterday trying to find if anybody else said anything. And it seemed like even, Tom Holland and the people involved with the Spider-Man movies are keeping quiet about this, but Jeremy Renner just apparently doesn't give a crap. So he's out there.
Jeremy Renner is just a wild card in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I mean, there's that whole thing that we've been sort of joking about where he's got like an archery line, or I don't even know what he's doing.
He's got an app now.
Yeah, he's got an app. He's got his whole music career going. He just seems to be living on his own planet. But he said, "Hey, Sony Pictures, we want Spider-Man back to Marvel, please, thank you. Congrats, Spider-Man rocks, please." So like, I mean, I guess there's something that somebody in the MCU is actually speaking out about this. I suspect.
Does Hawkeye even interact with Spider-Man at all?
I'm trying to think. There may have been one moment in like the final battle in Endgame where he may have taken the gauntlet, but I don't know if he took it directly from Spider-Man or if he was just in that line of succession.
No, it was Hawkeye gave it to Black Panther, and then Spider-Man took it from Black Panther.
Yeah, missed a person in there. And then Ryan Reynolds also acknowledged that this was happening. Somebody asked him on Twitter, "Can we now get a Spider-Man and Deadpool movie?" And he said, "You can, but you can only see it in my heart." So I think as of right now, those two are the only people who have actually like acknowledged any of the behind the scenes frustrations and all of the rift that's going on here. I mentioned that Disney has like a theoretical army of fans at their backs now, and we're starting to hear from those fans loudly. There's a change.org petition, which we all knew was coming because one of those pops up for every little thing that anybody is slightly upset about, and over 20,000 people signed it yesterday when I wrote the article, so I'm not even sure what it's up to right now, but it's basically just demanding that Spider-Man stay with Disney in the MCU. I'm not sure if these people understand exactly how. Oh wow, I just checked and it's actually up to 86,000 people now. I'm not sure if these people understand how Hollywood works. Like Peter and I were going back and forth on this yesterday. I don't think a change.org petition has ever actually worked when it's been aimed at a major Hollywood production. The closest thing we could come up with was when the Lorax came out, the Dr. Seuss animated movie. Some people petitioned, I think it was Universal or Dream Illumination Entertainment, maybe, whatever the animation studio was, to include some more like environmentally aware materials on their website and in their trailers, and they gave in and like included some of those materials on the website. So like that was as far as anyone's gotten in terms of like changing a Hollywood production, specifically with a change.org petition. Obviously there was the whole like Sonic the Hedgehog thing earlier this year, where the original design of that character did not please a lot of people, and then the studio actually gave in, or the filmmakers gave in, or however that worked. But I don't think a change.org petition had anything to do with that. There were a lot of factors that played into Sonic getting a design change, including the fact that the filmmakers themselves weren't really pleased with the original designs and wanted to have something that looked more like what the fans wanted anyway. And then finally, to sort of cap this whole thing off, there's a Facebook event called Storm Sony and Bring Spider-Man Home to the MCU, and on Halloween people are planning to storm the Sony Pictures lot in Culver City dressed in Spider-Man costumes to try to, quote, bring our boy home. So I don't know exactly like how they plan on doing that. And I don't know, guys. Like the image of several thousand people dressed up as Spider-Man and gathering at the gates of Sony on Halloween is something that, like, a few years ago, I feel like I would have been pretty amused by that. But I don't know how you guys think about this, but I feel like we're living in such an insane world right now that there's
so many other things that they could be directing their energies on.
Yeah, there's absolutely that. But like without even calling their passion and interest into question and putting that under a microscope, just the idea of a large fan-driven effort like this, where there's so much anger and passion right underneath the surface, I feel like it's a scarier sort of proposition than it used to be. Like these sorts of things used to just be like you could laugh and look at it as like a harmless thing, but like now part of me like tenses up when I hear about this. I don't know, what do you guys think about?
I remember when we were joking when Disney and the Disney Fox deal went down that Disney were now our corporate overlords. This very much feels like it's the case. now.
Yeah.
We are just subject to the whims of these corporate overlords, mostly Disney, because they own 80% of the entertainment industry now.
Yeah, Brad, what do you make of this Spider-Man costume protest?
I mean, we'll see how many people actually show up and do it. So many of these petitions are just, kind of empty, quote unquote threats, if you will. And,
Right.
It's easier to say, oh yeah, I'll do this on the internet than it is to actually go do it. If anything, it just seems like something that's kind of following in the footsteps of that Area 51 viral thing that's going around, where people are going to apparently storm Area 51 because they can't stop all of us. And it's like, well, they're a military, so they kind of can.
Do you know, actually, really quick, a sidebar, do you know the details of that? Is that supposed to have happened already, or is that, like, still scheduled to happen, or what's the deal with that?
I totally missed it. I only heard it, like, in the aftermath, I guess, or maybe it hasn't happened yet. But I remember there was actually a military meeting that was held because this Area 51 thing, and it's basically a meme, was gaining so much traction.
It's scheduled for September 20th.
Okay,
oh, wow.
So it's still like set to happen.
Yeah.
And like they're all going to do the Naruto run, which is the style of running from an anime called Naruto, in which the guy like runs with his arms backwards because he's a ninja.
God.
And it's hilarious and terrible, and I don't know what's happening with the world.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, I don't know if we're going to be able to solve it on this podcast, so I guess we should just move on to our next topic, which is Netflix and the theater chains are struggling to strike a deal for the Irishman theatrical release of Martin Scorsese's new movie. Brad, tell us what's going on here.
Well, The Irishman is a new Netflix movie that is supposed to come out sometime this fall. It will premiere first at the New York Film Festival, but it doesn't yet have a release date either in theaters or on Netflix. And that's because Netflix is apparently having a tough time negotiating with some theater chains about how to handle what they want to be a fairly wide theatrical release, presumably the widest theatrical release that Netflix has ever given to a movie. And that's mostly because Martin Scorsese said he wanted this movie to have a wide theatrical release, and so they're trying to do the best they can to accommodate him. But because movie theaters are still sticking to their guns when it comes to the traditional roughly 3-month theatrical exclusive window that they're allowed to have movies in theaters before they go to streaming or home video, Netflix is having trouble getting that window down to a more a smaller amount of time so they can get it into their streaming library faster. Apparently, the last time negotiations broke down, Netflix was really pushing for a 21-day theatrical release, which is what Roma got when it was in theaters last year. It was in theaters for 3 full weeks before it hit Netflix, and it seems like that's as long as Netflix is willing to go, and that's just not good enough for AMC Theaters and Cineplex, which is a Canadian theater chain. And those are the only 2 theater chains that are negotiating with Netflix to make this happen. Both Regal and Cinemark are staying out of it. They don't want to deal with Netflix because they already know that they're not going to do what they want to do. And this is something that's apparently been going on for months. I don't know if it's necessarily at a standstill, but they clearly haven't figured it out yet because no release date has been announced for the movie. And it'll get at least some kind of a theatrical release, like many of Netflix's movies that they've tried to push for awards have gotten. But usually those smaller releases only last for about a week, and they're in the smaller indie kind of theater chains like Landmark and Alamo Drafthouse. So it's a complicated situation for The Irishman.
Yeah, and I remember Netflix, when they first started, they made such a huge deal about how their whole policy was they wanted to make, and maybe not when they first started, but when they first started making original content, the whole thing was like, it has to be available on our streaming service at the same time that it goes into theaters. That was like a big hard line for them, and I think they've
the day and date release.
Yeah, they've slowly grown a little bit away from that for several like mainstream potentially award worthy titles. But this is a big deal because AMC is like the biggest theater chain in the country, and I'm just wondering, like, this kind of conversation sounds very familiar. This seems like something that Netflix has been struggling with for a little while, and the theaters have been struggling for a while too. This movie is maybe one of the biggest potential crossover type of maybe hits that they could have on their hands. A lot of people are going to be interested in this film. So from a theater perspective, it makes sense. You would think it makes sense to sort of allow people to come pay money to see it in your theaters. But I don't know. I guess I'm not as familiar with like the ins and outs of what exactly is involved with these sorts of decisions. But on a broader level, HT and Brad, what do you guys think about like the where we are and where we're going with this sort of rift between Netflix and movie theaters?
Yeah, it's an ongoing rift, definitely. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Netflix kind of still acts like a tech company and not like a studio, which is starting to become more like a major studio now because of the amount of films and the amount of television that it's just churning out. And it's still like very lacking in transparency when it comes to its numbers. It won't report box office numbers. I think that might have been part of the reason that it's at odds with AMC and other theater chains. But it's an ongoing thing. I remember last year, AMC and Regal banned or barred Roma from their Best Picture showcases for the Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I don't think is going to be lessening anytime soon until Netflix dramatically changes the way that they approach things. And I don't really know the exact details of how Netflix gets its films into theaters, but I think it actually has to pay or like buy out several screens
I think I
to
remember
actually
hearing
get
that
its
as well.
films into these theaters. So that's has something to do with it too. It's like very out of the ordinary compared to how like regular films are distributed. It has something to do with the distribution and like cutting out the middleman. I can't say I know the exact process that they go through, but I know Netflix is kind of bucking that, and that's where it's at odds with AMC and other theater chains.
Brad, let me wrap up by asking you this question. If this is still happening with a movie that's directed by Martin Scorsese, who is somebody who's like a massive champion of film and is like arguably one of the most popular and most well-known filmmakers that we have working in America today, do you think that this is going to have a chilling effect on anybody else being lured into work for to create movies for Netflix? Like you've got Netflix throwing money around left and right, and they're obviously going after the most top tier talent they can find, A-listers and stuff. But if they're not doing right by Martin Scorsese in terms of their theatrical windows, do you think that this is going to be something where people look at this and think twice about working with Netflix?
I think it depends. I mean, Martin Scorsese, I'm sure he knew going into this that there was the possibility that this movie wouldn't, get nearly as wide of a theatrical release as any of his other movies before. But he went with Netflix because they were willing to give him the money to make this movie. Paramount turned The Irishman down because they balked at the budget and they didn't want to make it. So if Netflix is willing to make these movies, it seems like some filmmakers are willing to take that risk and potentially, a little bit of disappointment by not having it seen on as many screens as it otherwise might, just so they are able to tell the stories that they want to tell. But at the same time, I think that Netflix kind of has to open up a little bit, because some of these bigger movies that they want to make, if they want to make legitimate blockbuster movies or big successful movies, they kind of need to put them in theaters, I think, because there are plenty of people who aren't Netflix subscribers. And it may cost money to put a movie in theaters, but if it's a movie like this where there's a big draw because you have Scorsese working with De Niro and Joe Pesci again and Al Pacino joining in, you want to make sure you get as many eyes on it as possible, and putting it in theaters will bring some money into Netflix if they do that. And it's easy to put a smaller movie onto Netflix and just let the views rack up because it doesn't, it doesn't cost as much to do that, and you make your money back. But with these bigger movies, I think they've got to be a little bit smarter and maybe play ball. And then again, at the same time, theaters need to reel back and stop, clinging to this old distribution method. The streaming game is changing things, and they've got to figure out how to entice customers to get in the theaters, without being slavish to this 3-month window. Not all movies need 3 months to sit in theaters. Some of them leave very quickly when they don't do well, and it's just the only reason that they're doing that is because the theater gets more of the ticket admission price to themselves as the longer a movie stays in theaters. And so it just seems like the theaters just need to figure out a different way to entice customers and make more money.
Yeah, it definitely feels like we're still in a transition period, even though it feels like we've still been having this conversation for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years at least. But it'll be interesting to see what the ultimate compromise is here, because I feel like in 5 years, the dust will have settled and a new method will have been found. Hopefully, I don't know, who knows. Check back in with us in 5 years and find out. But all right, I think that's going to do it for this today's edition of Slash Film Daily. You can find more about all the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word about the show any way you can. I guess right before we leave, let's tell people where they can find more of our work online. Brad, let's start with you.
You can find me at slashfilm.com all the time, writing all the live long day. Also on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton, and my own podcast, Go Flix Yourself.
And HT?
You can also find me writing every day at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Hoai-Tran Bui.
You can find me writing at slashfilm.com as well. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pearson. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.